Hello everyone and welcome. I'm the administrator of the International Booker Prize. Thank you for joining us today and thank you to Crankstart, the charitable foundation that makes all of this possible. Last time we met was almost exactly a year ago. I was addressing a room full of people. Some of you were there, holding a glass of champagne. Well, literature is the work of the imagination. And today, we are unable to meet in person. But what that means is that we are a world full rather than just a room full of people. Still together, in spirit, in creativity, and more than anything, in our love for reading. The International Booker Prize is a truly unique endeavour. It's open to any work of fiction written in any language, translated into English and published in Britain and Ireland. And the prize of £50,000 is shared equally between the author and the translator. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to the chair of the judges, Ted Hodgkinson, to announce the shortlist. Ted and the rest of the panel have read 124 books, both novels and collections of short stories, translated from 30 languages. It's been a marathon that has taken them from the South African veldt in the 19th century to the French countryside known as La France Profonde, from a small village in post-revolutionary Iran to the hurricane season in Mexico. Literature is the one art form that puts us completely in somebody else's shoes. It's the supreme act of empathy, as crucial to the survival of the human spirit as water or air. Welcome to the world in words.
Wherever you're tuning in from, whether you're already an avid reader of translated fiction or are seeking out stories from around the world, whether you've dressed up specially for the occasion or are in your pyjamas, a warm welcome to you all. These are strange times to be making announcements amid so much uncertainty about the future and with all our lives changed in unexpected ways. Surely this is the first time that the chair of the International Booker Prize has announced a shortlist from a 1-year-old's bedroom. And yet, it's in such an uncharted moment that we reaffirm what matters most, what takes us out of our isolation towards each other. The art of translation requires great precision, but perhaps even greater imagination and courage, to vault the boundaries of language and culture and reveal the varied and ambiguous lot of humanity afresh. Such courage and artistry makes short work of national and international lockdowns. When we embarked on our epic reading journey back in October last year, we were living in different times. Coming together from great distances every month, my brilliant fellow judges and I worked through assiduously a mountainous range of reading. As we debated and delighted in this rare community of readers, we were rewarded by the discoveries we made along the way. From immaculately attuned sensibilities to blazing new talents. Each book enabled by a deep dialogue between authors and translators. Then, as events unfolded around us, that cross-cultural conversation became an ever more hopeful and necessary act in a world that was outwardly shutting up shop and closing down. In this new reality we were all faced with, which novels held us with an ever-tightening grip? Which surpass recent events and restore our sense of wonder? Which uncannily channel the strangeness of the here and now? And above all, which books can be read at any moment in time, quieten any distraction, collapse any social distance, and replenish a shared sense of humanity? We were looking for exceptional books for exceptional times. Fortunately, we had a superb long list to draw on, representing the mastery and sheer range of fiction being written around the world. I was also immensely fortunate in the fellow judges I shared this monumental project with, Jennifer Croft, Lucie Campos, Jeet Thayil, and Valeria Luiselli, whose insights, humour and generosity span continents and make even the distance of video conferencing seem small. Each of our shortlisted books restlessly reinvents received narratives, from foundational myths to family folklore, plunging us into discomforting and elating encounters with selves in a state of transition. Whether capturing a deftly imagined dystopia or incandescent flows of language, these are tremendous feats of translation, which in these isolating times represent the pinnacle of an art form rooted in dialogue. Our shortlist transcends this unprecedented moment, immersing us in expansively imagined lives that hold enduring fascination. The shortlist for the 2020 International Booker Prize is The Enlightenment of the Green Gage Tree by Shokoufe Ozar, translated from Farsi by Anonymous and published by Europa Editions. The Adventures of China Iron by Gabriela Cabezon Camara, translated by Iona McIntyre and Fiona McIntosh and published by Charco Press. Till by Daniel Kellman, translated from German by Ross Benjamin and published by Quercus. Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor, translated by Sophie Hughes from Spanish and published by Fitzcarraldo Editions. The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa, translated by Stephen Snyder from Japanese and published by Harville Secker. And The Discomfort of Evening by Marieke Lucas Reinveld, translated from Dutch by Michelle Hutchison and published by Faber and Faber. True to the cosmopolitan spirit of this prize, you'll now hear from each of my fellow judges from their vantage points dotted around the world about each book in turn. Many congratulations to all.
So, of the 6 books, I'm talking about the Enlightenment of the Green Gage Tree by Shokoufe Ozar. Maybe one of the books furthest from my horizon of reading, published in underground in Iran, originally written in Farsi and translated into English by an anonymous translator, published by Europa Editions. The Enlightenment of the Green Gage Tree it's narrated by a 13-year-old boy who has been burnt to death at the beginning of the Iranian Cultural Revolution. It's a story of ghosts, full of magical language that turns into a torrent of words. So a magical realism of sorts goes through the whole of this story, but with a very real historical backdrop and deeply meaningful use of a whole series of ghost figures who all point towards what could have been, what should have been, and who fit together as a portrait of a very real family, torn apart and damaged, father, mother, and sons and daughters trying to survive a revolution and failing to do so. It's an extremely strong, very meaningful story, and an entry into a world which is both far removed from our English language horizons, and very artfully described and explored here by a writer who is using language to combine cultural reference and something much deeper, of a reflection on sorrows and the consequences of political violence in her own country. But it reads in a very universal way, despite an absolute torrent of poetry and magical realism, which might seem strange to the English reader, but is actually bringing us into a very real world.
I think the main thing that stood out about this one was the language. The plot is really great, and it's really sexy, and it's really fun, and it's really frightening at times as well. But what makes it really special is the language. And I've read the Spanish and I've read the English, and they're quite different, and they're both really stunning achievements in their own rights. The Adventures of China Iron is, in a way, a perfect book to be reading in the context of a prize that honors translation, because it itself is a translation of a translation of a translation ad infinitum. It's a really wonderful reworking of a foundational American myth, which is Jose Hernandez's Martin Fierro, which was a 19th century Argentine novel in verse. And it's a feminist reworking of that book, and it's a queer reworking of that book in such fresh language and with such a fresh perspective that it turns on its head completely this whole idea of how a new American nation could come to be. And it incorporates English words into the original Spanish text, and it incorporates indigenous words. And the translators, the translation team, Fiona McIntosh and Iona McIntyre, have done an incredible job of then reworking that reworking. And they've created a totally new text in English, which mixes the English and the Spanish and the indigenous languages into this gorgeous kind of fantasy of what it's like to travel in the 19th century through a largely uninhabited land.
I picked Thayil by Daniel Kelman. Well, it takes the reader into the 30 Years' War, and specifically into the time of plague. So, I mean, I'm sure he had no idea when he was writing this book how absolutely relevant it would be to our current catastrophic historical moment. But it absolutely is. And there's no way to read parts of this book without your hair rising up in recognition, without getting goosebumps of recognition. It's just so strange. And the unusual thing about the book is, okay, it's set during wartime. It's grim and relentless, and people are dropping dead from the plague. But out of that scene, Kelman does something absolutely unexpected. He makes a book that is funny, that's full of delight, and that is absolutely full of readerly pleasure. There's not a page that doesn't give you some kind of pleasure to read. And that is a really strange and brilliant thing to pull off.
Hurricane Season is written in a torrential flow of language, described, I think, well by a phrase from the novel itself. It's a novel of hellacious force. As the title suggests, it is a novel that, in sense, borrows from extreme weather systems. The deluge of language that runs through the book is mirrored by the atmospheric disturbances that occur in this part of Mexico. It's a book that would have posed an enormous challenge to a translator, and Sophie Hughes is equal to that challenge. In fact, I would say that it's a work of remarkable boldness and artistic bravery. Sophie Hughes has managed to capture the sturm and drag of the vernacular, the rambunctious energy, the controlled rage of the voice. This is a novel that deals with difficult subjects, with violence, misogyny, and with an endemic hatred of women who know too much, who are the custodians of the community's secrets, of its dirty habits. These women are expendable, and this is a translation in a novel which takes the rage and sense of injustice about those things and channels it into language of irresistible and overwhelming force. So The Memory Police is a novel by Yoko Ogawa set in an island off the coast of Japan. We found it remarkable that this was a book that was first written many years ago and yet felt so utterly contemporary. The policing of objects and memory is, in many parts of the book, described and configured as a contagion and as something that is sweeping the island, inducing a sense of panic. And this is clearly something that resonates particularly in the last few weeks. The translation is a work of great elegance and mastery. Yoko Ogawa is truly in full command of her art form, and Stephen Snyder elegantly and precisely makes sure that there's not a word out of place. This is a work of immense precision that is drawing on allegory, that is drawing on myth, that is drawing on dystopia, and is doing that deftly. It's a work of a Japanese master who transcends her cultural context to speak to us on a level that is universal.
I am going to be talking about this absolutely brilliant book, The Discomfort of Evening. This is an exceptionally detailed book in which immediately a world is erected. It's very hard to do that. It's very hard to immediately, in the space of a few lines, construct a world that is going to be the world in which the reader is going to live in for a while. When a book is perceived as a good translation, it is perceived as such on the basis of it not seeming like a translation. So that's the great paradox of the invisibility of the translator, right? The more invisible, the less a translator wants to stamp their own identity into a book, the better often. Besides the obvious, besides the fact that it's beautifully written and changes the way we gaze and look at the world, at least for the time that we're reading it, besides the fact that it lingers like a good book lingers, a good book remains there with you like an echo. Besides all of that, which is the obvious, I think this book stands the test of time in this new time in which we have plunged all of a sudden. And it does so in a way that the space of intimacy, of family life and family lexicon are resignified because of the attention that this book pays to the small, minute details of everydayness.
Thank you for joining us for this shortlist announcement. The winner of the International Booker Prize for 2020 will be announced on the 19th of May. We look forward to seeing you then. Bye for now.